Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to this Ilm Feed podcast episode. Today I have with me my good friend and mentor, author of From My Sister's Lips, and now a new book, Show Up. It's Naima B. Robert. Assalamu alaikum, Naima.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yeah, so Naima, your new book, do you have it with you? Can you show us?
Yes, here it is.
MashaAllah, Show Up, a motivational message for Muslim women. MashaAllah, I read the book recently and I was crying as I was reading it because do you remember last time we met on Ilm Feed, you very powerfully shared the story of your husband's passing and everything that you had to deal with, right, in the aftermath of that. And a lot of our listeners and viewers really, gave us a lot of feedback and said that they found your story so inspiring. So it's great that you've taken the story and, really built a lot of powerful messages around it in this book. And I just wanted to ask you, one of the key messages of the book is that tests are inevitable, right?
Yeah.
And yet you get to decide your story. And I loved that. I loved that message of the book that, tests are inevitable. You're going to be knocked over, right? By all sorts of things throughout life. But don't be the victim of your story. Don't allow your story to be a tragedy. You can turn things around and you can be the hero of your story. Can you tell us, for somebody who's listening, who's thinking, oh, that just sounds, impossible for me. You don't understand my situation. You don't understand what I'm going through. I had terrible parents. I had a terrible childhood and I've grown up and I've just found myself in terrible situations, etc., etc. Somebody who might be living that tragedy, right, or victim story at the moment, what would your message be to them, and through this book?
Well, Jazakallah khairan. That victim hero narrative is a really, really powerful one, because one of the things I talk about in the book is being aware of the stories we tell ourselves about our lives, right? And I give that, I think a very powerful example of telling the story of Khadija radiallahu anha and Aisha radiallahu anha as victim stories. No embellishments to the plot, if you like. I say the facts as they are. Widowed twice, married a man younger than her who didn't have money, and hardship upon hardship upon hardship, and then she died. And of course, people do click that, oh, she's talking about Khadija radiallahu anha, but we never think of Khadija radiallahu anha in those terms, even though that was an aspect of her life. We think of her as a hero because we frame her story as a hero story. And everyone has the ability to do that, inshallah, with their own lives, because this is, one of the things that I really wanted people to take away from the book is, an understanding of the power of our own perception and how our perception of our circumstances can actually change our experience of those circumstances. If, for example, are a woman who's been trying to have a baby, or she's married and maybe been trying to have a baby and nothing's happening. There are several stories she could tell herself about that situation. If she wants to be a victim and see herself as a victim, then that's easily done. What's wrong with me? How come everybody else is so easy for everyone? Is Allah punishing me? And allowing that herself to wear that as like a victim cloak. Whereas somebody else will reframe this. And I actually believe this is the Islamic way of dealing with trials. Allah wants good for me. Allah has something better planned for me. Allah wants me to focus on something else right now. Alhamdulillah, I get to do this still. I get to do that. I get to love on my nephews and nieces. You know, do you understand? Like, while you're in that space, you might as well frame it as something that is good for you than something that is bad, that is painful, that is a punishment, etc., because it will change your experience of that particular thing. Same for any other trial or tragedy, any kind of loss, because if you lost something, then it follows that you had something to lose in the first place. And even that is a reason for gratitude, for shukr, for feeling blessed, for feeling like you have experienced barakah. And for me, this life is hard enough as it is. It really, really is. There is so much outside of our control that at the very least, let's take control of the way that we see things and our mindset, so that we can at least have that kind of comfort and that safe space inside our own heads, to fortify ourselves when the tests come, because the tests are definitely coming. And the whole way through, I'm talking about establishing this safe place in your mind as an act of worship. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to learn and to grow and to become the best version of ourselves. That's why we have these tests, to be purified, to be educated, to have the way illuminated for us. Allah made good in everything. So again, it goes back to this tawakkul that we have in Allah's plan, that Allah wants good for me at the end of the day. And that's something that I hold on firm to. And that is what gives me my sakina. That is what gives me my peace of mind. That is what allows me to stay firmly rooted when the storm comes, if that makes sense.
Jazakallah khairan, absolutely. I mean, I love the way you highlighted Khadija and Aisha, because you're right. Like, we tend, when we're talking about the Muslims of the past, especially the Sahaba, their generation, we tend to valorize them and, talk about them as if everything was just plain sailing. And, these are just little facts, but we don't, like, she was a widow, or she never had children, or we don't actually think about that, like, oh, I wonder how that felt.
Right?
How did that feel?
How we experienced that, exactly.
Right, and we kind of raise them to kind of superhuman level, and so that's why we almost act as though that wasn't a struggle for them, right?
Exactly.
And with Aisha radiallahu anha, one of the things that I was reflecting on that I don't think anyone really talks about is that she, at the age of 18, became a widow, and then she never got married again.
Subhanallah.
Now, nobody talks about that, right? No. Because she's our mother, and she's the mother of the believers, and we want to show her respect. But that in itself is a difficult thing, that we really don't, I think, give her credit for. 18, that's like the peak of your youth, right? Subhanallah.
18 and no children.
Yeah, subhanallah.
And so again, this is the whole kind of the focus of the book is your life, whatever Allah planned for you, that is your life. That's what you've got.
Right. And that's what she did with Aisha radiallahu anha. She began to focus on her nephews and nieces. She began to take in orphans and start teaching them. She realized that she could still be a mother, right? She could still be a mother in other ways. And she, used her talents and had such an immense impact as a result, right? SubhanAllah. Jazakallah khairan.
So this, I mean, because I know that, mashallah, you're working, you've been doing research into this space. And I think, this understanding that, this life that you have in this dunya is the only one that's available to you. Meaning there is not an alternate reality somewhere where you made a different decision and you have another life available somewhere, and
like Back to the Future.
Right, Back to the Future, sliding doors.
If only.
It doesn't exist. What you have is what you've got to work with. So you might as well own it You might as well engage with it. You might as well be present and live it to its full with that tawakkul and that sense of purpose that we're encouraged to have as believers. And many of us, we check out of our lives. If it doesn't look the way we wanted it to look, the marriage, the children, the job, whatever it is, we check out and we go on autopilot and we just check boxes and do our duty. But really, we're not feeling it. Our heart's not in it. Our minds are not present. We're constantly numbing ourselves. And this is a reality for many, many people. This is the thing I want people to snap out of, because you're wasting your life by doing that. You're wasting your life and your potential and all these, the possibilities of connection that you're missing with your partner, with your children, with parents, with friends, with sisters, with whatever. All of that is passing you by while you're on autopilot and numbing yourself. So wake up. This is the only chance you have in this dunya. You might as well make the most of it. So that really showing up, that's what it's all about. It is show up and be present in your life and make the most of it, because there's more than enough there to keep you going, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan. Yeah, one of the quotes in the book that I love is, because you were created for a noble, lofty purpose with unique capabilities and potential. So wasting your life hiding behind the mask of excuses and fears just won't cut it. I think he really connected self-development with Allah, in this book, mashallah, which I really love. One of the things you talked about that I found really interesting was becoming a CEO and owning it. You said there was a point when you had to take over your husband's business, and you'd been running this magazine, and you realized that you hadn't been allowing yourself to think of yourself as a businesswoman, and you realized you needed to own that before you could show up, I guess. Like, what was the actual, in real terms, what was the shift that took place when you owned that?
It was mad, because I think, I became this, okay, let's for some context, we can say I ran Sisters Magazine for 10 years, but I didn't really run it for 10 years. I founded it, I started it off, I was heavily involved for the first few years. And then I had other editors on board, I had people taking care of the business side. So I really cannot say I ran that business. So that's the first thing, because again, I was telling myself a story that I'm not a businesswoman, I'm not good with business, I'm a creative, etc. Come to the stage where my late husband now is in hospital, Allah yarhamu, and it was decided that, look, you need to take over, because this company will continue, it has to continue, this is the thing that's sustaining the family, etc. So I was thrust into the role of CEO, and I did not know what I was doing. I didn't even know what the business was about. I had been to that office once in all the years that they had been in operation. I hardly knew the people. I think I knew like one or two people. There were 300 staff in that place. So it was not a small undertaking. And I'm thrust into this role. I'm in my iddah still. My children are at home, with, my surrogate mother, Suma, who some would call her a nanny, but they're home with her. And I'm having to just jump into this world. So when we say out of your comfort zone, like, this was the most out of my comfort zone I had ever been, for so many different reasons. And I was resentful. I didn't want to be there. I didn't choose this. I knew that it was the right thing to do, but I hadn't chosen it. And I didn't feel that I was, really capable of doing a good job. It was so many things happening. I just went in there and I was like, okay, what do you guys need me to do? And I went in there and did it. And all this time I'm kind of, there's this underlying sense of, I don't want to be here. I don't really want to be doing this. This is not my thing. And I'm just doing this because, my late husband began it and it's his dream, it's his vision. I need to do the right thing. So when I read the two things, I think there was a quote that I mentioned from Brendan Burchard, and then there's also Seth Godin, Linchpin, his book Linchpin, which was amazing to me. And the reason why Linchpin really landed with me was because he was saying that the only way that you become indispensable in your job is when you bring your full authentic self to the role. Because if you don't bring your full authentic self, all you're doing is ticking boxes, and anyone can tick boxes. But when you bring your full self to the role and you personalize it and you make it yours, no one can replace you. And that was, for some reason, Allah knows best, it was just like it landed with me. And I thought, this is my company now. It's not Suleiman's company. It's
you don't have to pretend to be your husband in order to.
Exactly. So if this is my company, then what values do I have that I want to bring forth? What talents do I have? What expertise and knowledge can I bring to this environment to really, sort of make my mark and make it my own? So that was the shift, really. And I started doing, lots of different things within the company that were in line with my vision for the kind of place that I wanted to run. Alhamdulillah, it was an amazing experience. The fact that we even pulled it off, Allahu Akbar, it was really something. It was really something.
So Naima, because what I thought you meant as well by that, owning the fact that you're a businesswoman, is getting to grips with the finances as well of it. That's what I kind of interpreted, because at times, like, I know for myself, like when I've tried to ignore the finance side of things, like as if that's not a big part of it. You can just kind of start ignoring it and not really realizing that actually, no, my decisions are not just about creative decisions. They're business decisions. Does this actually work? Is this sustainable? That kind of stuff. I mean, do you think that was also a part of it?
I would say, because I had such a great team at Suleiman's office and in that company, I don't think that my financial education started then. I'd say my financial education, what you're talking about, began when I started what I consider to be my first business, my own business. And that was in 2018 when I started my digital business. And that's when now I became much, much, much more focused and much more savvy, I would say, on the money side. And taking ownership of that more as a business, because it was purely a business. Like, there was nothing else that you could see it as except a business. Did this work financially? Did this not work financially? What was the best use of time? What's the best investment, and all that kind of thing? That came when I really went and set something up on my own after I had closed the company that my husband founded.
Okay, yeah. Jazakallah khairan for sharing that. You've been really vulnerable in this book, I must say. Like, you've really been willing to go places that, I think, especially as somebody who's well known, or somebody, known as a Muslim woman who's, like an influencer, as well as involved in Islamic work, etc. It's hard, isn't it, to be vulnerable? I mean, people don't expect us to be, or they think we have perfect lives and we don't have the same struggles that other people do. But here there was one part that really stood out for me, and that was the feeling of wanting to run away. I think everyone's felt like that at some point, right? Just to give people context, you've shown in this book, you've gone through like showing up in different ways, right? Showing up as a mother, showing up as a wife, showing up for yourself and your dreams. And in one of the sections where you were just talking about that sense of overwhelm that I'm sure so many of us have felt when, especially with kids. There's something unique about kids. I actually heard Jordan Peterson saying in an interview that he doesn't think it's possible for people to really grow up unless they have kids.
100%.
Okay. And he said it's a bit controversial to say that, but because never in your life has, I was thinking, yeah, it's so true, because never in your life has somebody else suddenly been more important than you, right? Like 100%. That's the first thing. And the second thing, it's almost as though it doesn't matter how organized you are. It doesn't matter, you know, how on it you were before you had kids. It's your sense of control, I think, kind of has to, it gets diminished 100%, you know.
It's a stretch zone to, you know, having children, you know, I talk in the book about the comfort zone and the stretch zone, and definitely, you know, children, having a child will take you out of your comfort zone. There's no two ways about it. And you will be in the stretch zone sometimes for many, many years, sometimes for the rest of your life, to be honest, because if we look at it, sometimes we think that, oh, pregnancy, maybe childbirth is like the big thing, but you realize that actually it's just one big thing after another, isn't it? You know, there is no one big thing. You know, the birth isn't the one big thing, because then there will be more big things to come. And literally until the end of your life, there will be big things happening and big things coming. You know, and so, subhanAllah, it's, I agree with that. I agree. I think that's it's an interesting, it's a part of our growth as human beings, as human beings, as a human society. It's one of those rites of passage, isn't it? It's one of those things that helps you to, as you know, as you said, to grow up, to become the more mature version of yourself. You know, it's like getting into a committed relationship is the same. You know, not on the same level, but a marriage does something similar, where all of a sudden, man or woman, you have to now take someone else's needs into account, someone else's feelings, someone else's, the way that they see the world. And, you know, you have to have this whole negotiation, which you've never had to necessarily do before. So it's all part of the journey. And that's the thing, is it's all part of the journey. And I guess what I wanted to do with Show Up is just to give people certain tools to help them on the journey, to strengthen them on the journey, because the circumstances are not in your control. Allah chooses the circumstances. Allah chooses the plot points in your story. And then what you have control over is how you decide to respond to those circumstances, to those plot points, to those twists, you know, that take place. You get to decide how you respond. And I think that even the understanding that you have a decision to make, that you can make a choice, is in and of itself a powerful, life-changing realization. Because a lot of people, they do think that everything just happens just as it happens to them. They're making choices all the time. They don't get it. They just think something happened, I responded to it the natural way, the way I normally would respond. But no, once you understand that there is a process to it, something happens, your brain understands it in a particular way, and then you feel a particular way and take a certain action, you realize that I can now change the way I feel, the way I act, by changing my perception. And that's the superpower that Allah gave us, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned somewhere in the book that even inaction and apathy is a decision, right? Like people think, well, if I don't rock the boat, if I don't, like, I think one of the things where this kind of can present itself is when there's an argument that needs to take place. There's a problem that needs to be faced, you know, like as a family.
We need to have an argument here. Like, we need to have an argument.
Yeah, because people think fighting or arguing in a marriage, for example, or even in a family, right? Yeah. They think that's just a bad thing.
It's a bad sign.
But sometimes you need a little bit of a reset, you know, you need need a little bit of a, like, this thing, if we don't deal with it, it's not going to go away. It's just going to keep getting bigger, and I'm going to get more resentful, and it's going to blow up in our faces, and it might even be too late if we don't deal with these types of things as they come, you know. And I think people sometimes think, well, you know, if I just, people think patience.
I knew you were going to say that. Yes,
nothing.
Yes.
And
people
to just
think that patience solves everything. Oh, as they say in South Africa, I'm doing sabr, that it solves everything. But as you were saying, even doing sabr, there's a price to pay for that. Even avoiding an argument, there's a price to pay for that. You know, so like you said, it's not just the action that there's a price to pay for, there's a consequence. There's also a consequence to not taking an action, to not saying what you need to say, you know, to pretending that nothing is happening. There is a price, there is a consequence for that. Go on, sorry. I interrupted you completely.
Yeah, no. I was going to say, well, people have the wrong idea of what sabr is anyway,
Yes,
right? Like
exactly.
they think it means just be quiet and don't say anything,
Yeah.
or don't deal with the problem, and somehow it will wash over and things will be all right.
Yeah.
When actually sabr means patient perseverance. So to me, persevering in a marriage means dealing with everything as it comes, dealing with stuff, not shutting up and not saying anything. Same with kids, same with siblings, same with the wider family,
That is, do you know what? I feel like you need to say that again for the people in the back, because that's huge what you just dropped there. Come on, Sheikh, and bring it. Say that again.
Thank you, Naima. Yeah, what I was saying is that people think sabr means, because it's translated in English as patience, which isn't actually, it doesn't do it justice, right? Patience in English means, you just be quiet and you just forbear and you just allow things to happen and things will get better, right? But sabr as an Islamic concept is patient perseverance. So persevering is an action. It's not inaction, right? So if you have a problem, it means persevering in dealing with it rather than
not persevering in the problem.
Yeah, persevering in allowing it to just exist, So I think we need to change our understanding of sabr. But there was one part that I really wanted to, I want to ask you about flow, the idea of flow. If you could explain that to our viewers and listeners. So I think it was connected to the feeling of wanting to run away.
Yeah.
If you could talk a little bit about that feeling and then the connection with flow, please.
Sure. I think, I think we can all agree that the amount to which our reality differs from our expectation is the amount of frustration and unhappiness we experience, right? Let's maybe say that again in a simpler way. The further apart your reality and your expectation are, the more likely that you will experience frustration, sadness, anger, lack of satisfaction, basically. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I was doing my coaching work is that a lot of women have unrealistic expectations of themselves and of their lives. And the reason they have those unrealistic expectations is because they compare themselves to other people. And very often they compare themselves to other people who are at a different stage in life. Sometimes the comparison could be with your own past self, for example. Yeah. I think I talk about this in the book, that, you're in a situation now where maybe you have, young children, and, your whole life is these children. And you're looking at who you were before you married, and you're thinking, I'm not that girl anymore. I'm not as beautiful as she was. I'm not as exciting as she was. I don't get to do the things that she got to do, which means that that's your expectation and this is your reality. And there's a huge distance between the two. So therefore you are unhappy. Yeah. Now, when you are in flow, you acknowledge the stage that you're in. And you understand that just like that stage had its good and bad, its difficulties and its pleasures, so this stage too has its good and bad, its difficulties and pleasures. We will never escape this duality ever. Ever. There is nothing in this life that we do not have to pay a price for. Nothing. Even the best of things, salah, catching fajr. Nobody ever looks at fajr as something that you pay a price for. But do we not pay a price to pray fajr? Of course we do. We have to wake up out of the bed. We have to, get the alarm going. We have to get out of bed. We need to make wudu, and all of that stuff. But of course, our perception of salah is that salah is all good. But it is good, but it still has a price attached to it. You know what I'm saying? So the fact is that, again, going back to being present in your life, the whole concept of flow is understanding and respecting the fact that your life will change and you will need to flow with the changes of your life. And it's okay. It's okay to not be that girl before you got married. It's okay to be different from the woman you had with your first child, for example, compared to your last one. It's okay to not look like your cousin. It's okay for your life not to look like what your parents expected for you. It's okay for your marriage to look different to your friends' marriages. It's okay, as long as you are obeying Allah and you can reap the rewards from the life that you have. You're good, because everyone has trials. Everybody hurts, everyone. And these are they sound like truisms, right? But I do think that people fool themselves into thinking that there is a better version of my life somewhere else,
Yeah.
and B, there are people out there who are happier than me, whose marriages are better than mine, whose children are better, who have a perfect life. There are actually people out there who exist, who have a perfect life. Social media doesn't help. There are,
exactly.
because the social media, in particular Instagram, I feel it encourages us to kind of peek into people's lives and compare what they have.
The perfect version of their lives.
Thank you, exactly.
Yeah.
That filtered version.
The filtered version. Yeah.
SubhanAllah. So flow is about acknowledging that, we should be like the water. When the water comes down, I say this in the book, when it comes down from the spring and the mountain, it comes through. If you've ever seen a mountain spring, it's very thin, like ravines almost. It doesn't have a big, big wide waterway. It works its way down the mountain. Until it
negotiates the stones and the pebbles.
Oh, I like that. No, really exactly.
You can add that in the next edition.
It cuts its way through, exactly, and then it gets to the stream, and then the stream it can pick up a bit more pick up more speed, and then once it goes into the lake, it spreads out, and then it will narrow again and then out to the sea. That's us. That's flow. That's flow.
I get that so much. Like, it's so funny, isn't it? How at every stage of life we're waiting for the next one, right? And we're just and yet sometimes when I reflect back and on because my kids are all a lot older now, when they were little, I actually miss those days. And I know that when I was there, I was like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. There were such blissful moments, There was a certain slowing of the world, that I yearned for and I kind of missed, SubhanAllah.
And that's the thing, Fatima, I lament this, and I'm going to get emotional now. I lament this because we do waste so much of the present because we're either living in the past or living in an imagined future. It's like the present is never good enough. And it's such a shame, because once the present becomes the past, trust me, you'll be living there. Just like you said, you'll be longing for those days. You'll be reminiscing about those days. But in your heart of hearts, you know that while you had it, you did not appreciate it. You're only appreciating it now that it's gone. And again, that's another message in the book as well. And that's one of the lessons that I learned from losing my husband, is because, trust me, we as human beings, we're the worst for taking Allah's blessings for granted. We're just the absolute worst. Whether it's our husbands, our wives, our children, our parents, the current house that we live in, the weather, whatever it is, we are the absolute worst at taking things for granted. And unfortunately, often we have to lose in order to appreciate what we had in the first place. And I guess my plea is to say, guys, don't go out like that. Don't be the one that had to lose it in order to realize that they had something amazing. So while you've got these kids, yes, okay, they drive you crazy, but they're going to always drive you crazy. It's never going to change. Yes, you've got this man and he drives you crazy, but it's okay because he's always going to drive you crazy. What about the other things? What else is there here? What other barakah is there here? Where is the joy? Where is the love? Where is the laughter? Focus on that. Focus on that, because you can't have something and not pay a price. You can't have a husband and not pay a price. You can't have a wife and not pay a price. You can't have kids and not pay a price. You can't have a job and not pay a price. Everything costs something. So focus on what you're getting for your money. Do you know what I mean? Focus on what you're actually getting in exchange for that investment, whether it's in dunya or in akhirah. Focus on that. Because if you've already made the investment, you might as well see it as a good investment. And that's a perception issue. It's not anything else.
one of the practices that has really helped me and my family is, we don't give ourselves enough credit sometimes, about the things that are going well, Like, it's so easy to say, well, why isn't our family like this? And why aren't my kids like this? And why don't we do this? And, it's so easy for us to constantly feel like that. I think we really need to like do annual kind of reviews. And I do that. It sounds a little bit corporate, but, like we literally sit down at the end of the year and we'll go round and say, well, what have we done this year? And what have we experienced? What were the positive memories? Let's reinforce them, because it's so easy for our entire lifetime to whiz past, and for people not to have, I think it's called internalized, or, they haven't really taken stock of what happened and what we've experienced and what we've been through and what our wins have been, right?
Yeah.
You did mention Brendan Burchard in the book as well, and I think one of the messages that I love of his is bring the joy. He's saying that you get to infuse your life with the energy that you want.
Yes,
you're not just receiving vibes and receive. No, you got to actively infuse that into every interaction, every thing that you do. And I love that.
I love that too. Joy is a big one for me. Joy and gratitude, those are my two words.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khairan. But there was one thing that I was a bit like I'm really unsure about, and I want to know what you think, because there's a part when you talk about showing up for yourself emotionally, right?
Yeah.
And you say, am I tuning into my emotions and ensuring that I acknowledge them and deal with them? Am I addressing emotional issues as they arise? Am I working to heal any wounds from the past? And then, at the end you say, or am I ignoring my mental state and suppressing my feelings? And this is something that I have been thinking about and trying to work out myself. I want to know what you think, because for a lot of us, I think we'll be able to, we can identify with the fact that our parents' generation, they were very stoical, right? And for most of us, I think, especially for me, I'm just talking from an Asian background, I guess. And they didn't, they didn't talk about their emotions, right? Like it's only when you really, really dig. I realized my mom was an orphan.
Wow.
What's that like? Like she's
really.
Yeah, and my dad. I interviewed my dad, right? And I was like, Dad, tell me, Dad, you don't talk about your childhood. You don't talk about when you were a little kid. You don't tell us And he said, sometimes there's things that it's worth forgetting about, right? And I was like, okay, you know what I mean, right? And then later I found out that he grew up in a slum in India. Wow. And his family, one of his brothers really worked hard and decided they were going to move into a flat. That was a big deal for them, right?
Yeah.
Wow. And from there, all of the brothers ended up getting educated, and because of some people making that decision, and just saying, no, we're not going to. And now they've got scholars and doctors and, in their families, mashallah. But, he won't really he doesn't want to talk about what that felt like, like that period of his life. Same with, just that generation in general.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we look at them and we think, well, they're our role models, right? And sometimes when I've faced issues and things, I've thought, well, how would my mom deal with it? How would dad deal with it? And they would probably deal with it with that same sort of stiff upper lip thing, and kind of, well, it's sabr. It is sabr, but it's an active sort of sabr because they believe that, they'll make dua, they'll take actions, but they won't complain. They won't even share it. They won't necessarily feel like it's an emotion they need to deal with. Do you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I do.
But our generation, I mean, I have found a lot of utility in expressing, in sharing, not necessarily with the world, but with particular people, and dealing with stuff, as you mentioned in your book. So what's the balance? Because there is a certain type of over obsession with ourselves, right? Like
a narcissism.
In our times, a type of narcissism, oh, woe is me. It's all about me, how I'm feeling, how you're making me feel. What's the balance, because there was something good in that generation's way of dealing with stuff as well, right? It wasn't all bad.
I have something to offer on this. Are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah, but you need to explain it just in case.
I will do that. So if anybody who's listening or watching, you can Google Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you'll see a pyramid. And at the bottom of the pyramid, it's obviously wide at the bottom and small at the top. At the bottom of the pyramid is physiological needs. So you're looking at basically air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction, okay? Basic human needs.
Yeah.
Up from that, you have safety needs. So personal security, employment, resources, health, property, yeah? Next from that is love and belonging. So friendships, intimacy, a sense of connection. Up from that is esteem, respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom. And up from that at the very top is self-actualization, right? So the desire to become the best version of yourself and the most that you can be to fulfill your potential, okay? So I find this to be a really interesting framework because at different points in society, different levels of that hierarchy are available because of what's happening in society. In wartime, for example, you will find that people are struggling to fulfill even the first and second level of needs, basic security, basic food, shelter, etc. And I would argue that for many of our parents, many of them, not all of them, but many of our parents lived in a time where you couldn't necessarily guarantee even the first level. So your father, for example, growing up, his family's focus would have been that first level, making sure that they've got somewhere safe to sleep, something to eat, and be safe, right? Once they moved up, they were able to now address things like health, like education, etc. But before they managed to secure the basic needs, no one's talking about education, okay? No one's talking about health, etc. It's literally like, are we going to eat this week? So many of our parents may have come from those types of backgrounds. And I believe that their way of parenting, of being parented, the way they were socialized was necessary for the time that they lived in. They needed to be focusing on the stoicism you speak of, right? Yeah. The whatever it takes. It's got to, I can't afford to be in my feelings. I can't afford, I don't have it's almost like an indulging.
A luxury. Yes, it's like a luxury. Yeah.
A luxury. So for example, so your dad's one, and any of our parents are a good example of that. I look at the example of a marriage, for example, maybe previous generations, what were they looking to secure for their children when they wanted to find a spouse? The basic needs, probably the one up from that, health and, some level of economic, safety, but love and intimacy and connection, maybe not. That wasn't necessarily, it wasn't even an expectation, let alone something that people would be actively looking for. Now, that would be our parents, our grandparents' generation, especially in Muslim cultures. Fast forward to today, I would argue that we have basically ascended the hierarchy of needs because we are no longer worried about the basic needs. We have the health, we have the education, we expect the love and belonging, and we are looking for something higher than that even, which is psychological well-being, which is, now we have the luxury of paying attention to our feelings, of dealing with trauma. But when you're in a situation where you're literally operating at a survival level, trauma goes unnoticed. Trauma doesn't exist. It just is. That's how it is. your body and your mind is on survival, in survival mode. And
right.
I think that is an explanation for why.
I love that. I never thought of it like that.
Oh, okay.
But you're absolutely right, though, because actually they say that especially when it comes to immigrants, they say that, there is a big difference between each generation, right?
Yeah.
So we can see that even just with our own kids, right? Their experience of life in the UK, like, is completely different to ours. And sometimes we think, well, I don't appreciate these basic things, And our generation, we do things like we're having these big Eids and we're trying to compensate for
exactly. And again,
that stuff in our own childhoods.
This is exactly right. But this is the thing, is that I go back to my original point, which is that everything has good and bad, and everything comes at a cost. So just like you'll find, many people who came from working class backgrounds, whether they're immigrants or not, they would have had that same stoic mindset, that same almost survival instinct to say maybe they had the first level, but now we're securing the education and the health, and basically you got beats. Maybe there was an alcoholic in the family, there was stuff happening, but your focus was getting through it in order to be able to, have a better life and establish something for your family. Now, that may have been the bad side of that. The good side was your work ethic that was built, your values, your sense of appreciation, your sense of identity, maybe the close community bonds, etc. That was a very real part of that experience. Fast forward to those working class kids that got into education. Maybe they were the first ones in their family to get an education. They married somebody who has an education. Now they're middle class, and their kids are growing up in the suburbs with all the comforts that their parents never experienced, never had. They're in private schools, the whole middle class thing. Great, good stuff. Also a price to pay, because these kids do not have the work ethic, they do not have the appreciation, they do not have the values, and they don't get it. They don't understand the value of money, they take everything for granted. This is it. This is the paradox of life, subhanAllah. This is the paradox of life.
So how are we going to prepare them? This is what I'm worried about. Like,
well, I think I would say,
how will they learn not to be self-indulgent? And
we have to hold back. The kids are indulged because we indulge them. Facts. Yeah. And we do it from a place of love, but understand that there's a price to pay for that. You know what I mean? If you're putting on fantastic Eids every year, and I'm not saying people should stop doing this because you make your choices, but just know that the consequence of that is that your children will expect a fantastic Eid every year, and that will become their normal. Now, maybe you want that to become their normal, and that's fine, but just know that there's a cost for that. You know what I'm saying? And try to offset the cost in some other way somehow.
That's the cost.
Yeah, unfortunately. So because you see, sometimes the other thing as well is that we are living vicariously through our children. And
that's what it is.
Because we wanted the big Eids, because we want the big Eids. And maybe that's a moment of self-reflection for you to say, how can I heal this part of me without damaging my kids?
Yeah.
How can I heal this? How can I fill this void that I have without damaging my kids? It's like children who, people who grew up with parents who never said, I love you. And we know many of those. Probably many of our parents, I know even my father only started saying, I love you, like in the last few years. I don't remember him saying that when I was a child. He would show it in other ways, but he never said it. It's just different.
Same here.
Right? I'm sure many people can appreciate that. Now, so a person, for example, who grew up feeling that they were somehow, some way unloved by their parents, or felt like they were neglected or whatever, they can overcompensate with their own children, right? By going the complete opposite. So maybe they grew up, their parents were very disciplinarian. And so they decide that when I have my kids, I'm not going to do that to them. They're not going to go through what I went through, etc., etc. And they end up overcompensating and not giving them any boundaries and just letting them run wild. What you need to do as the adult is just take a moment and say again, how can I heal this part of me without damaging my children, because this is not about the kids, it's about you. It's about something that you need to resolve within yourself, not about your children. Because if we are trying to heal our traumas through our children, the chances are that the children will experience some negative consequences from that, because it means that we are not able to do what is right for the kids. We're doing what feels good to us. And usually what feels good is not the right thing. That's what I found anyway.
Absolutely. I do still think that there is a balance, like in expressing our problems and expressing our emotions and holding them back to a certain degree, I don't know what that balance is yet, but I do think there is one, because I think sometimes a problem can be temporary, or it can be something that can be dealt with. But when you express it, I don't know, like I'm still figuring this out yet.
Got something for you. Got something
When
for
you
you.
express it very, very openly, it becomes bigger as well. Like, because in your own mind, I mean, like, maybe it's something that could be overcome, like, but by expressing it and being too open about it, now you've made it so real, like, that. So like one of my mentors, one of the shiuch, he was saying to me, advice that he was given, that he gives to others is, the well, he says, the well, when you take water out of the well, just take it from the top, right? And I said to him, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? And he said, well, sometimes when we dig deep, when we go too deep, and you try to get the water at the bottom of the well, we get the mud and the and the dirt as well. And he said, with a lot of things in life, like he was talking about marriage, he was talking about kids, like overly, because there is a such thing as over obsession, right? Like overly analyzing things. But he said, if you over analyze things, it's like you're digging too deep, and sometimes it's better just to take the water from the top.
I have something for you on this. Again, it goes back to being clear on what you want. If what you want is to have a lasting marriage and you want to be happy in the marriage, then make your actions and your thoughts and your emotions align with that. The first thing I wanted to say actually before that was, let's remember that emotions are not triggered from the ether. Emotions are as a result of the process that takes place in the brain. How whatever has happened is being processed, right? That is something you can do. You can do something about that, right? So the first thing is, if you are in an emotion that you don't want to experience, you may want to look at reframing how you are seeing this particular experience, this person, or whatever it is, right? Because if the emotion is not helpful, change the way that you see the thing, and it will actually affect your emotions about that thing. So that's the first thing I want to say, is that people do think that something happens, I felt an emotion, there was nothing in between. That's not the case.
As if they don't have a control or a filter.
That filter, exactly, that the information is being filtered by your brain, and the way that you filter it is what affects the emotions that you feel. So if you can change the filter, or at least become aware of the filter, you can actually change your emotions. That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing is, everyone needs to get clear on what they want, and then ask themselves, this thought that I am entertaining, this path that I'm going down in my mind, these emotions that I'm cultivating, are they giving me what I want? For example, like you said about the marriage and the well, if you're focusing on the negative in your marriage, you're going to be unhappy. You're going to think that, I don't want to be here anymore. How can I get out? It's not fair. All of this, and you go down. That's like downward spiral. Is that what you want? I mean, is what you really want to leave the marriage? Because if it is, then have at it, okay? Because that's the way to go. If that's what you want, then that's the way to go. If you do not want to leave the marriage, if you want the marriage to last, if you want to be happy in the marriage, change the thoughts that you are having about the marriage. Because if you change the thoughts that you're having and you change what you're focusing on, the way you feel about the marriage will change. If you guys don't believe me, try it yourself. Get what you focus on, and what you focus on grows. You put energy into it, like you were saying, you put energy into negative emotion. Not only does the negative emotion grows, but you start to see evidence for why you should feel that way all around you, right? And if you're in that situation, you've made a choice to be in that situation, it's probably not a good idea to cultivate negative emotion about that situation, because it's a choice that you made, right? And there's subhanallah, I believe that there's always khair in every situation. No matter how difficult it is, there's always khair. And if you decided that you're staying in that situation, you might as well focus on the khair, so that at least you can have peace of mind. At least you can have sakina. At least you can feel that I've made this decision and I'm at peace with this decision because I am okay. I am okay with this. Does that make sense?
And usually there is a lot of khair. That's the thing. And
sometimes there's way more khair than there is the annoying things.
Right.
But because we're focused on those annoying things, like you said, the annoying things grow, and it actually corrupts our perception of the whole situation.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes that's why sometimes when people are out of that situation, they look back and they say, oh, it wasn't that bad. Like, you know, maybe I didn't realize things could be worse, you know, without certain, or I didn't realize what I was taking for granted in that. It goes back to that whole taking for granted thing, right? The grass is greener, the grass is greener in the future, in the past.
The grass is seldom greener. The grass just needs watering, just like everywhere. And you know, there's that saying I use in some of my master classes about, you know, I think it's a Native American story about a man a grandfather who tells his grandson about the two wolves that are in his mind, and they're fighting, and he doesn't know which one is going to win this battle. And one is the higher self and one is the lower self. And, you know, the grandson asks him, like, which one will win? You know, is it the greedy one, the angry one, the frustrated, rageful one? Or is it the generous one, the peaceful one, the calm one? And the grandfather says to him, the one that you feed.
So true.
It's the same with us, you know, that what you focus on, where you put your energy, where you put your time, you put your resources, that will grow. Inshallah, it will grow. So be careful and be mindful of what it is that you're actually watering, what it is you're pouring into. Because if it's something that is not for your benefit in dunya and akhirah, then you may not want to be pouring into that anymore. You may want to shift your focus to something else that is in alignment with how you want to live and what you want for yourself and what Allah wants from you as well.
Just briefly, if you don't mind, what we were talking once, and you were mentioning about, because we're talking about, we've touched on the topic of marriage and looking for the good, and right. You were talking about a gathering where you met some teenage girls, and actually recently I've also done a session with teenage girls, and I was quite surprised as well, you know, with some of the things that they're thinking about that I don't think we were thinking about at that age. And maybe it goes back to the whole hierarchy of needs thing, you know.
No, they're just unrealistic, that's all.
Sorry?
They're just unrealistic, that's all.
They're just unrealistic. But you see, that sense of entitlement or unrealistic nature comes from, doesn't it, like a type of over-analysis and over-indulgence. I don't know, like
the media as well. I'm not going to put that down on individuals. You know, we are being programmed all the time. And I believe now with this generation, the programming is much more pervasive than it's ever been. We had pop music and TV shows. These guys have not only got music streaming all the time, they've got films, they've got, you know, obviously TV shows and everything, but they've got social media, which is the worst. So they're literally being programmed. Their ideas are being shaped literally almost every minute of the day by outside forces. So
to be specific, we were talking about how, you know, in the topic of marriage, some of the girls who are like teenagers, they're already talking about things like toxic masculinity and Can you just describe that? And just so that we, like, I'm assuming most of our listeners and viewers are going to be parents, probably the generation of parents, right? Like, we need to be aware of this stuff, you know. And I feel like I do these Q&A sessions where girls can ask whatever they want and they can submit anything. It doesn't matter. And I talk about them things in completely explicit terms, you know, because I feel like they need that from within the community. You know, they shouldn't have to seek that outside the community. And also they shouldn't have to allow these worries, these doubts, or whatever questions they have to fester to such an extent that later on in life they might blow up, right? So I really believe in dealing with these issues, and I hope that this conversation will help, especially the parents out there, to notice this, because it's become pervasive, you know, in the culture. And I mean, even in my children's Muslim school, I remember hearing the head teacher doing this chant in assembly about girl power. And I which is kind of funny.
Very on trend.
Sorry.
Very on trend. Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Muslim school as well.
Wow.
You know, but in the sense that he thought he was being empowering to the girls, which is fine, but
it's not fine.
I don't know, because
like
I've heard about schools where boys were recently there was a news article about boys being asked to stand up and apologize to the girls in class.
Let me tell you a story.
I was like, what?
My daughter came to me and she said to me, "Oh, Mum, you know how boys see girls as objects, yeah?" I said, "Excuse me, what do you mean?" She said, you know how boys see girls as objects, yeah, as if this is a thing, this is a foregone conclusion, it's a fact, everyone knows that. I said, what exactly do you mean by an object? She said, you know, something that you just use and you throw away. I said, oh, really? So I'm thinking this comes from one of her friends has got something's happening on TikTok, and one of her friends has got it. Her friend has come to her and said, well, you know how boys use girls like objects, yeah? And now she's coming to me with this. So I challenged her on it. And I broke down, you know, a non-biased understanding of what she was talking about. But I think, to your point, we as parents, especially, you know, those of us who are sort of Gen X's, millennial parents, we don't have any excuse for not engaging with the things, the ideas that are out there that our children are exposed to. We don't really have an excuse, because it's not like there's a language barrier. There's no cultural barrier. A lot of the time, a lot of these ideas, you are familiar with them in some shape, size, or form. But I have found personally one of the greatest joys for me over the past year has been having intellectual conversations with my sons, and now my daughter, mashallah, now that she's older. But really, you know, we will, because they will come with their stuff from the outside, and I will listen to them, and some things I will say, yeah, that makes complete sense, or I'll contextualize it, or I'll challenge them on it. And I'll say, well, what makes you say this? Or why is that okay then? Or what's the problem really with this? And get them to think for themselves, to really start using their critical thinking skills to filter out the stuff that is being thrown at them and pushed on them all the time through social media and all the other media as well. So that really, for me, is the key. Parents, wake up, get savvy with these ideas, and you know, work it out for yourself, you know, to see, okay, well, for example, as you mentioned, toxic masculinity, etc. So research it, break it down. Don't just accept these terms that are being thrown out there into the world. Because my thing with the feminist worldview, and I was on somebody else's podcast, and I ended up kind of talking about feminism, which I don't normally do. And you and I, over the years, we've had a lot of conversations about feminism, and I think my thinking has definitely evolved on feminism and on feminism's legacy. But things like patriarchy, misogyny, toxic masculinity, etc., these are put out into the world as if this is the truth. This is the truth of the world. And if you're going to look at Islam through a feminist lens, you're going to come up short. That's the fact of the matter. If you're going to look at our families through a feminist lens, you're going to come up short. And the reality is, if you look at men through a feminist lens, you're going to come up short. because as far as feminism is concerned, men are the problem. Masculinity, period, is the problem. It's not even about the toxicness or anything. It's like any kind of masculinity is. It's
masculinity is toxic.
Exactly. And so what I think the point I want to make is, as a mother of boys, I cannot stand. I cannot get on board with that, because I want my boys to have confidence in themselves, like I want my girls to have confidence. I want my boys to have self-respect, like I want my girls to have self-respect. We had there was a book, like a book reading, a book club invited me. Their reading show up, and they wanted to ask me some questions. And somebody said, why don't you do a version of Show Up for teenage girls, because they really need this stuff? And I said, I hear you, and inshallah I'll work on something. But I would argue that not only do men need to read what I put in Show Up, but our boys need this advice too, because we act like our boys are all okay, their mental health is sound, they're confident, they're grounded, they're established, they're on purpose, they know their values. In what world? In what world? If you're talking about confidence, the boys and girls need it. If you're talking about embracing gratitude, boys and girls need it. If you're talking about sincerity and having intention, boys and girls need it. If you're talking about having courage, they both need it. If you're talking about embracing yourself and being authentic, all of us need this. So that is one of the reasons why, as a mother of boys, I have to battle. I have to push back against this, because what you're saying is that my boys, for them to grow up proud of being boys, like we tell our girls to be proud of being girls, that is problematic. You're saying that my boys, wanting to be men and wanting to be men who provide and look after their families and feel a sense of responsibility is toxic? No, because trust me, my daughter, she wants a man like that. So where is she going to find a man like that if I'm emasculating my boys? If I'm telling my boys that they're too much and they need to tone it down, and and I'm beating them over the head with patriarchy and misogyny and making them feel guilty and feel ashamed for being a man, then where's my daughter going to find what she's looking for? Where are all these sisters going to find what they're looking for if our men no longer have a sense of self, no longer have a sense of worth, because of the fact that they're men and they're carrying all this generational guilt, or they're supposed to carry all this generational guilt? It doesn't make sense. It makes sense in the moment, but in the long term, it doesn't make any sense at all. Once you start looking at marriage and you start giving birth to boys, it doesn't make any sense anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you're a student, when you're in uni, it makes all the sense in the world. Try to have a relationship with a man when all you can talk about is toxic masculinity and patriarchy and misogyny. Try to have a relationship based on mutual respect and admiration with a man when those are the ideas that you entertain and that's your lens. Try that. And then try to raise a boy who feels good about himself as a little boy, as a young man, with all those ideas in your head. It's a big ask.
Absolutely. And I think I was reading the life of Ella Collins, Malcolm X's eldest sister, who really was responsible for bringing him to Islam. In the long term, when you look at her, the way she nurtured him, she became his guardian, she, all of that. And then she paid for him to go on Hajj. And one of the things that she mentions, her son wrote a biography, and he quotes her extensively in it. She says when Malcolm came over to live with her, she could see that he had quite an aggressive nature, right? This is the way she described it. And she said, but she knew it was his expression of masculinity. And she didn't want to do anything to suppress it. Instead, she believed in channeling it in the right direction, right? And I just loved the way she talked about it, because she said, she was obviously talking about like Black history, and she was saying how, the Black man's masculinity has been, basically bludgeoned in the American context for so long. And she didn't want to do that to the next generation of men. And I just loved the way she actually saw those masculine qualities, right, which today we kind of look on as, I don't know why, as negative. And yet we need those qualities, right? Like we need the soldiers to be aggressive, you know, we need.
Like I said, it makes sense when you're a student and then you're at uni and you're reading books. It makes so much sense. Once you come out of that environment and you look at the real world and you look at history and you look at the future, it doesn't make any sense at all. Sorry to say.
Yeah, and if you think about Malcolm X, and I just feel like, wow, you know, that sort of the anger.
That's a man.
You know, that's the anger that he had, the aggression, if you want to call it that, right? That was in him was so needed, you know.
It was not aggression, it was masculine energy.
Right.
Yeah. I say masculine energy and feminine energy are different. And you know, obviously masculine energy can be channeled into aggression, but it's the energy, and the energy can go into aggressive acts, into competitive acts, you know, all these areas where we see men thriving. It's their masculine energy that allows them to thrive. Just like when we're in those environments, our masculine energy allows us to thrive there as well. But you know, we want them on that. We need them to have their masculine energy in place.
But I just love the way she described it, you know, about how she believed in nurturing that masculine energy. Mm-hmm. She called it masculine aggression, but you know, masculine energy.
Can I just say as well is that what I have observed in our community is that I don't think that we're at the stage where we are shaming our boys for being boys at all. I think boys have a lot of privilege in our community, but again, that privilege is costing them. Because what I have seen is that boys, unfortunately, are left to their own devices. They don't have enough guidance. They don't have enough companionship. They don't have enough investment in their development for them to actually come through this quagmire of sort of adolescence as whole and healed and confident individuals. I feel as a community, we shelter the girls and we leave the boys out to the wolves. And that is not the way that it should be. You know, you'll find, you know, in our community, so many, I mean, again, different communities, different strokes, but so many initiatives for girls, so many role models for girls, and different kinds of role models as well. You know, I mean, I feel that there is a culture of, you know, sisters supporting and empowering other sisters, and, you know, sort of girls things. And my kids would say to me, and my friends' sons would say, it's like, is someone going to do something for the boys? You know, are we going to have something for the boys? So it's like, you know, maybe at one point the boys got all the good stuff and the girls left at home. But I feel since the 90s in the UK, I see girls really being invested in, and women, sisters, being very mindful about creating spaces for girls, and maybe not that much investment on the boys' side. Certainly, this has been the case in the communities that I've grown in. There's the masjid, and that's it.
Do you think it's because people fear losing their girls more? Is that what it is? They feel like they're more susceptible?
Okay, now more susceptible is an interesting phrase. They feel girls are more vulnerable. Therefore, they need to be catered to with a girls' school, a girls' club, girls' sports, etc. But if you are not paying as much attention to the boys, then what are you doing with the boys? The boys are in a mixed school, they're in mixed sports, or they're just out in the street, out on the road, doing whatever. And that, for me, is problematic. Because, yes, our boys need to learn how to handle themselves, but at what cost? At what cost? That's the question I always ask. At what cost? Yes, the boys need to be able to handle themselves. And I think fathers, I would love to have fathers in this conversation, because I think that mothers, our tendency as mothers is to protect and to nurture, whereas men, the fathers, for all the kids, they're more likely to kind of push them out and, you know, make them take risks and do dangerous things. But I would love to have this conversation with fathers to see, are you happy with the way that the boys are kind of like out there in the world doing whatever they're doing, getting caught up in whatever they're getting caught up in? Do you think that this is the best thing for their development as the father? Or could we be doing things a little bit differently for boys as well, and maybe just making more provision for their own nurturing and development, and, you know, and just not leaving them to the elements. I think that's my thing, is just leaving them to the elements where they, it's tough out there. It's tough out there, especially urban boys. The Muslim boys in an urban context, come on, you know what's happening. SubhanAllah.
Jazakallah khairan, Naima. And I think the last thing that I really want to touch on with you is embracing imperfect Ramadans. Yeah, can you describe the context in which you mentioned that in the book? And well, this podcast is probably going to go out in Ramadan, so you can imagine the sisters. They had it all planned, they had it all worked out, and now it's probably mid-Ramadan, or it's and it's like, oh my God, it's all fallen apart. At least it's not the way they'd planned it. What's your philosophy for Ramadan with kids?
Remember the thing I said about the gap between expectation and reality is the amount of pain and frustration you'll feel. So of course we aim high and we have high hopes, but expectation is not the same as hope. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Hoping for something, having a vision for something and planning for that is one thing. Expectation is something else. Expectation is more like daruri, necessary. Like, this is how it has to be in order for me to be happy. That's not great. That's not great. So, if you are in that situation in this Ramadan, I will say the same thing as I say in the book, which is show up for what you have and appreciate what you have.
Yes.
Take the barakah from what you have right now. Do not pay any attention to what is not yours, what is not for you, what has not been written for you. It is none of your concern. Do not spend a single moment fixated on what was or what is yet to be or what you don't have. There is no barakah in that, no benefit whatsoever. Fish fa'ida fi, as we say in Egypt. Fish fa'ida fi. So that's what I would say is focus on what you have, be grateful for what you have, enjoy what you have, pour into what you have right now and make the most of it. And just say, Alhamdulillah, I've got this and I'm good with this. This is great for me. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, and so my philosophy has been definitely for the last few years of Ramadan, simplifying everything, strip it down to its basics. So when I see like on Instagram or in other places, like these sisters who are preparing these elaborate, beautiful displays and, like these calendars, like for each
the youngins, it's the youngsters. Mashallah.
Mashallah. I admire that, but I'm like, no, thanks. Because for me, simplicity is everything. Simplicity is savoring Ramadan. Like, you can have simplicity, you can have the bread and butter things in place. So, what are the bread and butters of Ramadan? Iftar has to be ready at a certain time. People have to be in a good, I would say, mindset throughout. You want people to be in a good mood and taking care of their well-being throughout the day, right? While they're fasting. If that means getting everything off your calendar, for me, that's what it means. And making sure you get your needs met, the sleep, the private time, the me time, the time to just have a little space just for me where I can close the door and escape to, just to do my own little ibadah, reading, etc. And just have the basics in place, Taraweeh. I think people are going to be going to Taraweeh this year, especially the men and boys, if the mosques do open to a certain extent. If it's in the house, make that the focal point of the day. And if it's outdoors, then make sure you have everything ready for people to be able to do that. And I feel like simplicity is the key, because it just makes you then value the what's actually important, in Ramadan.
Everything else is a distraction or a complication at the end of the day. We know what the month is for. We know what it's for. We know how to get the most out of it. It's just human beings, we like We like
The
frivolity,
frills.
I guess. Yeah, we like the frills. Yeah.
But even for Eid, I feel like I started noticing that kids start focusing more on gifts than people, you know? And so I just really completely cut all of the kind of frills down. And I'm like, we're meeting family. That's the important thing. Getting to meet them, you know, getting to spend time with somebody who loves you. That's important, not what they're going to give you, you know, which can end up becoming the focus. So, yeah, I think simplicity as well. Jazakallah khairan, Naima. So people can get your book from Amazon, can they?
Yep. Actually, just anywhere online they can get it from.
Yeah.
All the online retailers, and if the Islamic bookshop does not stock it, just ask them to stock it. It's from Q Publishers, so they can get it from there.
Jazakallah khairan. Yeah, show up. Do look it up, brothers and sisters. Thank you, Naima. Jazakallah khairan. I hope you have a great Ramadan and Eid.
You too.
And I hope we meet as well, inshallah, during that time.
We will.
Okay. I'm just going to sign off. Jazakumullah khairan, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining me. I really hope you benefited from that. I hope you're having a great Ramadan. I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you, and Eid Mubarak for Eid. You know, I'm assuming that this is going to go out around that time. Jazakumullah khairan. Stay in touch. Share this episode with people, with somebody who needs to hear it. You know, I'm sure I personally have benefited so much from Naima's book, and she shared so many gems from her book during this episode. So, Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.